David Jones, a very warm welcome to the Humans versus Retirement podcast.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Can't wait to have this conversation, Dave. We've had a couple of meetings and said a few things around what we're going to talk about. So I can't wait to delve in. What I'd love for you to do, you've got a really interesting backstory and journey that is still going on through various different guises, and I'd love for you to talk to the audience about that. And then I would also love for you to share with the audience exactly who Dimensional are, what you stand for, and why you invest the way you invest clients' money.
Sure. So should we start at the very beginning, as Julie Andrews famously sang?
Absolutely.
Well, I think a lot of times when people ask you about your career or how you got to where you got, it all makes sense in retrospect. So if you look back over the journey, you can see all the things that contributed to how you got to where you are today. But of course, nobody really can start at the beginning of it and say, yeah, I would have ended up where I am, because that I couldn't even could have conceived that when I was in my 20s. But if I look back, it all kind of makes sense because I was an academic. I was doing a PhD at Manchester University, and I was doing research work down in London and ran out of money, so I needed a job. And because jobs weren't so easy to come by, especially for lapsed PhDs in American history, I ended up selling advertising for a living, which, if anybody's ever done it, is quite an interesting introduction to the world of sales. And I did that for a little while in a fairly hothouse atmosphere, and that taught me a lot in a short space of time. And then I went to work for a more prestigious company doing that. And then I ended up leaving that and going to work for a recruitment company, actually. And so I worked for a recruitment company, then became head of training. So I was doing some early projects on computer-based training. And then I had a chance meeting with a financial advisor because I needed to sort out some pension stuff. And we hit it off so well that he ended up offering me the job as the general manager of his business. So I didn't know anything about financial advice or financial products, but I started working with him, and over time just became more and more interested in working on the financial advice side. We did a lot of corporate pensions work, so became the person who would go out and do 10 meetings a day at our clients, talking to people about their pensions. And things moved on. Ended up starting my own firm. Also had a coaching company, so I was coaching advisors. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I found a company called Dimensional, and this really changed a lot about the way I thought about investing, and certainly a lot about how I could do a better job investing my clients' money. And so when the opportunity came to join Dimensional back in 2009, it was really a dream come true. And so that's been the last 15 years, really. So again, as I said at the beginning, if I look backwards, it all made sense because there was the academic background, there was learning about sales, learning about people in the recruitment business, learning about financial advice when I worked in the financial advice business. So sitting in the seat that I do now, working with financial advisors, talking to them about not just their investment side of their business, but also their client communication side and the practice management side. It really all makes sense to me as you join the dots backwards.
Mm. So as an academic, Dimensional seemed to be a natural home for you to go to. And I'll be really interested for you to just kind of bring to life the evidence-based and kind of academic framework and research that Dimensional work to, because it's something that's so important and fundamental to how I believe you should invest your money. And we'll get into I think the weeds in a little bit throughout the conversation, but
Sure.
yeah, bring that to life for me.
As some people may know, but I'm not assuming everybody would do, Dimensional was born out of the University of Chicago Department of Finance and Economics. So a lot of the people who set up the firm, David Booth in particular, Rex Sinkfield, were former students of Gene Farmer at the University of Chicago. And so a lot of what they sort of became part of their DNA was this research into capital markets and sort of the basic principles that we really now, I guess, take for granted in some ways. But at some point, somebody had to figure all this out. And the key to any academic work is you start with ideas, and then you sort of test whether those ideas have any validity, and you evolve a theory. And then from theory, you gather evidence, and then you subject that evidence to stringent testing, and then see if your theory is bears out. And I think that was the key, and what really attracted so many people to this academic way of looking at the functioning of capital markets, was that it wasn't random. In the sense that you could understand where returns came from. You could analyze market returns. You could subject them to some analysis and stringent statistical testing, and draw some conclusions. Now, of course, there's varying degrees of noise around the evidence, but over time, you start to get some certainty around what works and what doesn't work, and some fundamental principles that underpin what you do, not least of which is the concept that information, so in other words, everything that is a known out in the public domain about a particular security, will be priced in. And it is incredibly difficult, if not impossible, for anybody who is operating with public available information to do better than the collective wisdom of the planet operating on the same information. And so we think that prices in a free and fair market, current prices are the best reflection of the value of any particular stock or security. So that being so, you can do a huge amount with that without having to do any forecasting whatsoever, because you can actually use that information to identify securities with higher expected returns. And the reason why that would be the case, because it's underpinned by the theory. So what do we observe over time? That smaller stocks as a population have higher expected returns than larger stocks. Value stocks over time have higher expected return than growth stocks. So that's been observed in the data. Of course, it doesn't always hold true over any given period of time, but over long term, the theory bears out. And that's what Dimensional does. I mean, we apply that academic work into the way that we think about how portfolios should be built.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because a lot of everything that we do as human beings, we want to see the academic research and science behind it before we believe it, before we consume it, before we buy it, before we do whatever we do with it. Even if you're not academically minded, I think most people like to see some sort of evidence behind the thing that they're trying to do. Yet investing seems to it's never really caught on in a big way that that's how you should invest your hard-earned money. It should be at the hearsay and the crystal ball gazing of a few people. And at no other walk of our life would we subject our brain to the anxiety that would bring. And so it's really that Dimensional still feels like it's kind of, or that way of investing, the academic research and the evidence around value companies, small cap companies, short dated bonds, if we kind of look at that whole arena, is so in favour. It just feels like it's still a secret into the wider world, and I want to touch on that with you in a bit, because I'd love to get your views on that. I do want to start off with something, because you have been working in financial services for a number of years, and I want to pull on your threads of experience, both owning a financial planning business, working with retirees, coaching other financial advisors, and obviously now Dimensional puts a huge amount of amazing content out when it comes to retirement space globally. And so, in your opinion, what do you think is the biggest challenge of the retirement transition? And then secondly, once retired, what can be, or what do you think is the biggest challenge?
Yeah, well, that is a great couple of questions, and we could probably spend the next 2 or 3 days really delving into that. And
I think
granted,
we've got episode part 1, part 2, part 3, haven't we, coming up? So.
Well, I think in some respects that question is as individual as anybody who is going through retirement, because clearly everybody is going to approach that very, very differently. But if we kind of sort of tease out some of the strands of the question, and I think we start with, what's the biggest challenge pre-retirement, and compare, let's say, the situation now to it might have been a generation ago, that for a lot of people, there would have been a mandatory retirement age. So they would have known that if they hit 65, I mean, the day after that, they would be retired. So there wasn't really any doubt about that. And the decision might have been, did you need to early retire? And that was frequently driven by a health consideration rather than anything else. And then the second thing is that their retirement income would have been provided by a defined benefit scheme. So they didn't really have the anxiety around retirement that might be true now, because it's become very much more individualized, that decision, and so it comes with a huge amount more anxiety and stress related to firstly that there's no defined time when somebody has to retire. So now they've got to make a decision about it, and so when is the right time to do that? And there might be all sorts of reasons why that might be a difficult decision to make. It might be a financial reason. You don't know you have enough to retire on. There might be a health consideration, like you have to retire, but you don't really want to. It might be you don't know what's the other side of that door, and there's a lot of anxiety around status. Who am I once I'm retired, and all of that. And it's an irreversible. It's like for a lot of people, you press that button, the exit button, and there's no coming back. Now you might continue to work in some capacity, but it's unlikely that you go back to work at the same level with the same remuneration that you did before you took that decision. And then you have to add into that. On what basis do you make some of those decisions, and are you being well advised and well guided? And the sad reality that we're facing is there's just not enough really good qualified financial advisors to go around and help people make this incredibly important transition decision without having proper advice. And I think that's a huge part of why it is such a challenge. So then we get, I think, to your second question, and you'll have to remind me what it was.
No, kind of obviously that the transition is an interesting a kind of phase in itself, right? That kind of you're in your 50s, early 50s, late, and it's kind of that 5-year transition post pre and post retirement, which I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head around the points that you made. But once there, what is kind of an ongoing thing in your experience or opinion that people have to kind of deal with? And I just want to pull on a thread, because I think you absolutely rightly said the anxiety was taken away. Retirement was put on a plate for many people, and it wasn't that long ago that mandatory retirement dates got scrapped, right? I mean, as you said, it's a generation effectively. So not only is that anxiety there when you're trying to plan the thing, but there's obviously a kind of a constant background noise and chirp at you because you're now living in the thing, but you haven't got these defined benefits that you had before. So that what are the thought process and us as humans and the behaviors that you've observed and witnessed and some of the research papers that you've done around that kind of living those 20 years in retirement?
Mm-hmm. So I think there are four big challenges for the retiree typically, and so we'll come back to the one that's the obvious one, which is the wealth. So if you say there's wealth, there's health, connectivity, in other words, the social aspects of somebody's life, and their purpose. Okay, so we can go whichever way you want, but let's come back to the wealth one last, because then we can take it in in whatever direction you want to take it. So I think the first thing that I've observed, and you see a wide dispersion in responses from people who, let's say you get to that moment. First of all, was that the right moment? You're essentially saying that's the mic drop on your professional life. Okay, were you ready? If you were going through, and I do sort of get the sense of, if this was the last time I was doing this, would I be ready for that? And I may not, I may never know when that point comes. But so there's that psychological preparation to say, I've given up on that part of my life. So what replaces it? What's the purpose? And you do hear the stories of people say, oh yeah, well, I'm playing golf every day, or 4 times a week, and then yeah, but that's got a bit tired. I can't do that every day. There's what's the purpose? And are people's their cognitive facility, their everything that kept you in the game when you were working, and when you take that away, the cognitive sort of decline accelerates. That's what we see in the research. And some people are saying, like, retirement, terrible idea. You should not stop. And I maybe agree with that. But let's say there are other people for whom it's absolutely been the best possible thing. And I've got friends and family who say, honestly, and it's the classic line everybody's familiar with, I don't know how I ever found the time to go to work, because I'm just so busy. Doing all of these things. And we know that there's a huge range of things, from the grandparents who get involved very much in the childcare, and that's something that they do, or they're involved in charitable or voluntary work. I know that my sport is rowing. Almost everybody that I compete with now, my crew, they're mostly retired, and they'd love for me to retire, because then I could go rowing with them more mornings a week, and we could train more often and win more races. But I'm not in that headspace to do it, because I get so much enjoyment from the work that I do. So finding the purpose becomes a really big thing. I think the other side of what people fear a lot around the future self is that future self somebody who has good health, feels very still attractive in some way. They're not old, wrinkled, stooped in appearance. They also want to feel connected, because the feared for future self is very much that person who's lonely and alone and isolated, and we know that is very, very bad for people's longevity. And so again, that idea of, are you retiring into a life that is filled with social connection? And whilst it's difficult to draw big sort of gender parallels, but the evidence that you see in the literature strongly suggests that women have been much better about building social networks, especially within their community, as opposed to men who've maybe built social networks often around a career. But you take that away, and then they don't have that sort of social support network in place, unless they've got something like the golf club or my case, the rowing club where you do that, get that connection.
Mm.
You take that away, again, you're really challenging people.
Mm.
Then we come to the health considerations, and you'll be familiar in your work with a lot of the research around health span. It's not just about the fact that there's longevity, that you live a period of time. It's what is the quality of life that you're going to experience during this period of time, maybe from your 60s to your 90s, and if you can enjoy that, with your health and fitness, staying as well as you possibly can, and there's work to be done around nutrition and the type of exercise that you do, and not forgetting to do your weights. It's not all about doing cardio. You've got to challenge yourself, and so there's things that you can do that massively make a difference. And if you'll allow me a little sort of side story, and one of the things that really shaped my thinking around health and wellness in retirement was what happened to my father. And my father was, when he was widowed, he lived 13 years after my mother died, and he was incredibly fit and active. He would go ballroom dancing. He actually joined the local gym. He was doing weightlifting with a group of young guys, as he called them, the 70-year-olds in the gym. And he lived until his early 90s. And only for about a month did he actually have to spend time in a care home before he died. And I remember being in the care home, and these poor old people in the care home, they were taken to the lavatory by the care assistants, but often they'd be forgotten and left. But they didn't have the physical strength to get themselves off the toilet. And so there would be these plaintive cries for help. And I'm thinking, well, that hasn't just happened. I mean, this is a lifetime, or half a lifetimes of inactivity. That means you don't have the strength, and actually you've brought it on yourself in many respects. Sitting on the sofa watching TV has been very, very bad for your long-term health span. So to me, I mean, it was one of those pivotal moments in my life where I go, well, you have a choice here. You can sit on the sofa watching TV, or, as in my case, you pick up the kettlebells and you start working on your core strength, and hopefully that will work out.
Yeah, do you know what? I've said it a few times on the podcast, but one of the most quoted things I say with clients, and I say a lot on the pod, is the Harvard 85-year study that the overwhelming evidence suggests that the number one thing to a happy and long life is social connections, and your ability to have them in a social environment. Stuff like rowing and ballroom dancing and golf or whatever. But those social connections are so important, because it then leads on to become mentally and physically health, and keeping that health and doing those things. So yeah, I think it's so important for people to understand that, and then fully utilize time, because as you said, that, as I frame it with people, the go years, go slow years, no go years, retirement is in 3 phases now. The modern day retirement definitely has kind of this real active phase, a slowing down phase, and then that later life bit where later life might be 10 years, it might be a month, but you're definitely going to get to a point where things don't work anymore, and you can't do that. Can't do this.
Well, I think you asked a question when we were thinking through the planning of this around how you manage time, and I've thought about this question, and honestly, I would manage time no differently to how I would manage it in my work environment. In other words, I'd want to be just as structured in the way that I use the precious amount of time that I have as I do now in a professional environment as I do in if I was not in work anymore. But again, I've got this extending on the story about my father a little bit, which is and I'd noticed it before when my mother died and then my father died, is of course you get a lot of admin to do. Immediately after somebody dies, you think, oh, there's all this bureaucracy to deal with. Surely we must have got a better system than this. Then you have to get very recently bereaved people to do admin. And then it sort of struck me that it was unbelievably therapeutic in the sense that you had to get up every day and do something because you couldn't ignore it. There were forms to fill in and funerals to organise and checklists to be done. And I realised just how important it is at times like that you provide people with structure. And it's actually the absence of structure, whether it's the recently bereaved, or it's actually you remove the structure of somebody having to go to work every day and saying, oh, you have complete freedom. And most people would say, oh, complete freedom, what a gift, how fantastic is that? Or is it a curse? And so much of the time that we enjoy, the free time that we enjoy in the world of work is because we feel like, oh yeah, this is precious time, and we don't waste the time. That's and then we go back and we earn more holiday time. Yeah. But if you give somebody complete freedom and no guardrails around that, they drift.
Yep. It's really interesting because I think that, as you said, you when I first start working with people that are thinking about retiring in a couple of years' time or whatever, you often hear that comment around, I can't wait to not have any structure, like or around that. And I always kind of take that with a little bit of, pinch up, because like you, I understand through people that have retired and not had structure, how challenging they found it. And it's okay to have a breather, right? Maybe 3 months or 6 months where you can just get things out the system. But I think and again, there's some evidence around this, if you leave it longer than 9 months, it actually becomes habitual and a bit of a pattern, and you find it very difficult to break out of that. So, an exercise that we do with people is trying to understand how they're going to spend their time and think about structures of mornings, afternoons, and evenings. What do Sunday evenings look like? Because you might have been preparing for work and had some structure around that. It doesn't mean you have a rigid diary, but structure is so important to understand that you have a bit of a purpose to pull back the duvet, when certain things are going to happen, because then that gives you impetus, it gives you an importance to be able to do those things. So a tip for anyone listening out there, and David's kind of seen this firsthand, that is so important to feel like you can put some structure to the way you spend your time, because you need to be, I believe, in retirement, even more intentional about how you spend your time. Because as you said, if you're not, it drifts. And that's a bad thing.
Yes. I believe it is. Yes.
Yeah. No, well, I think we've seen it. I want to, let's touch on the wealth element, right? Let's really kind of dig into this, because obviously that's your, amongst many subjects you're very knowledgeable about. And I'm not great at American history, so this is not what I can't ask you questions about that, but I can definitely ask you questions about investment strategies in retirement. From a wealth perspective, how important is it to invest your money in retirement with evidence and academically proven methods? Is it even more important to have a framework and structure in retirement when money anxiety might be even more heightened?
Well, I'd split that question down into two elements, really, because there is the investment. In other words, we are going to invest your money into some vehicle. Is it a UCITS fund or whatever vehicle that we invest your money in is the means by which we deliver a financial plan. So I would actually answer your question by saying, start with the planning first.
Absolutely.
So if you've started with the financial plan, and as we know, the vast majority of people do not have a financial plan that gives context and meaning to how they will structure their financial life, but also the achievement of the things that are important to them. And that may be, and let's just be blunt about it, for the vast majority of people, the purpose of retirement planning, financial planning, whatever it is so that you will have a stream of income to replace the income that you used to earn from going to work or being self-employed, whatever. But now, because your human capital has run out, that what you live off is what, that's it. It's your investment capital, your pensions, etc. Is what it is. Now, I have achieved, I believe, a certain notoriety with a presentation that I do called the Back of a Napkin Financial Plan. And that was born from my experience of working with a lot of people, where I literally would sketch things out on the back of a napkin or a sheet of paper. But it was the very, very simple idea that, there's these four elements. There's what you earn, there's what you spend, there's what you own in terms of your investments, pensions, etc., and what you owe. And through a number of sort of questioning procedure that I'd have with people, we could identify that most people were very, very unconscious about what they were actually spending. They couldn't tell you, what I spend on a given month. So the idea that they would know that in 20 years' time what they needed to live on, and they didn't even know for the following month, was kind of ridiculous. But as you walk through the sort of this reveal, it's this idea that what you own. So when you stop working, what you own, your pension, your investments, has to pay for what you spend. And I would just let that sit with people for a moment. What you own has to pay for what you spend. And there would be this sort of dawning of realization that would come across their face, where they were, oh,
yeah,
oh,
that's it.
That's it. And then they would go, but, and then they would, of course, well, how much would I need, and do I have enough, and all of those questions would come out, which of course is the perfect gateway into the discussion around, well, why is financial planning so important? It's because actually we want to give you the highest level of certainty that we can, that you are going to be able to maintain lifestyle when you come to retire. I mean, there's a lot of work around this point about wealth in retirement, but essentially, what do people want? Is they want to be able to maintain the lifestyle that they enjoyed based on the earnings of the last years of their working lives. And because in an environment where you worked for 40 years and got a final salary pension that delivered about 2/3 to 3 of your final salary, and you stripped out all the costs of having to go to work, etc., and the major costs of it, the expenditure of funding mortgages, etc., that would actually, you would have that equivalent standard of living with kind of no risk to it, provided the scheme could deliver it. And so that is the dream, isn't it? That there's not a lot of uncertainty around it. So the financial planning aspects has to then sort of compensate for the fact that now all of these decisions are owned by the individual. And that's where you'd want to give them the comfort of saying, right, we have a plan in place. We know how much you need in terms of capital, but it is not about the capital. It is about the income. And I think that the challenge that has arisen because of the evaporation of defined benefit and its replacement with defined contribution, it's overly emphasized the accumulation of this capital sum, and sort of reduced the thinking about income. Now, the challenge that can arise, and there are many, but one of them is that people feel that they have to protect the capital sum. So they go, oh, well, hang on a minute, I can't see that go down, so therefore I must invest it in something that is really safe. And what do we know as planners is that the more certainty that you want, the more expensive it is. In other words, it's unlikely for most people that they will be able to fund their retirement income on a cash-like return. And honestly, if that was the way they were thinking, you might as well go and buy them an annuity, because at least they get the mortality
premium
subsidy within that. If that's the way they were thinking, no, we need to help them shift their thinking to say, no, what we have to do, because we want the investments to do some of that heavy lifting, to be able to maintain your expenditure through retirement. But that, of course, is going to need some careful thinking about, because we've got certain challenges that we need to contend with. Now, when people are in accumulation phase, of course, we don't mind the fact that there is volatility in the market, because, hey, great, we wouldn't, in a sense, you wouldn't want it to always be going up in a straight line, because you would never get the sort of pound cost averaging effect. You'd want there to be opportunities to buy stocks when they were cheaper. But of course, the flip side is, and we all know that the most dangerous period of time is for the recently retired, who hits a bad sequence of returns in the early years of retirement, and if they're having to withdraw capital from that to live on from maybe falling equities, that is the real big concern.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's when we get from the financial planning context, is understanding how these liquidity needs are going to be met over time, so that these periods of time can be managed. Very simplistically, that you'd have that safety fund that will mean that there's at least 1 to 2 years, if that's what you've agreed, 1 to 2 years where you can maintain your expenditure. So that's one side of it, and then the other to me is it's constantly needs review. So obviously for a long period of time, retirement or delivery of retirement income, if it wasn't defined benefit, it was delivered by an annuity. So you had one big scary decision to make, but after that it was set in stone.
Yeah.
But now, of course, if it's not being solved by a product, the only other viable solution is it's got to be done by planning. And therefore the planning is an ongoing process, and therefore the adjustment of the plan, the expenditure expectations is got to be fluid. There's got to be flexibility around it in order that you can manage current expenditure need with future expenditure need, and make sure that you are keeping, operating within bands that allow you to say with a higher degree of certainty, you're not going to run out of money. Obviously, that's the biggest fear is you run out of money before you run out of life, and that's what we're trying to avoid.
Fantastic, David. I want to pick up on something, because when we say evidence and academically proven approach to investing your money in retirement, I say that, but it doesn't actually kind of equate to the fact that I'm always talking about value and small cap stocks. The evidence and academic research points to the fact that the sequencing risk of return is a big thing that we need to make sure we invest for, as you said. So as you said, if you start taking an income from an invested pot of money and the markets fall reasonably aggressively and you're taking that money out, you're compounding losses, and it makes it even much more difficult to take that back. So, research and evidence and academic papers make us understand that. We know the impact on inflation. I'm going to come back to that with you in a second. And so understanding what those pots of money are used for, understanding why you would have 1 or 2 years sitting in cash, understanding why you would maybe put another couple of years worth of non-negotiable expenditure, i.e. we've got a big birthday or holiday or a house improvement or a new car coming up, and we don't want short-term ups and downs in the markets to affect that decision that we're going to make. If that's got that job, and then if your investment pot of money's got a different job, i.e. that's a more longer-term, inflation-proof, that research is really important to get out. And I think that's you articulated that amazingly. Off the back of that, then, do you think that, because you mentioned kind of embracing volatility in an accumulation phase, when we go into de-accumulation, people confuse risk and volatility a lot. Do you think that retirees have got risk wrong when it comes to thinking about actually what the true risks are and how they structure their investment portfolio, including everything, right? Whether that's cash or property or etc. How they structure that when it comes to thinking about risk in retirement?
Well, that raises a great question, because I think there's enough debate between professionals in this area, but certainly in the wider population, there will not be a great understanding of what risk or volatility is, and they'll use those words interchangeably and not really be able to define what we mean. I think Ken French, who's an academic who's well associated with the dimensional, I think people will be familiar with the Farmer and French work that's been on. They've published many papers together. But he has this definition of risk, which I think is very good. It's actually very useful, which is what is uncertainty about future consumption broadly defined. So I say that again: uncertainty about future consumption broadly defined. Okay, so now if we put that, for our retiree, you go, okay, so the thing that we most want to be able to help you manage is the uncertainty around your future consumption, because we want to make sure that you can maintain the lifestyle, because not being able to maintain your lifestyle, that's not what you want, and for all sorts of reasons, from your, even down to your physical health, but also your social standing in the community and everything that you've built your life upon. So we want to be able to maintain the income, and we also want to make sure that you don't run out of it, so that you get to the end of your life, and whether you spend your last pound on the last day, or you have the idea that you want to leave significant legacy to your family or to charity, whatever it is, but you manage those things well. So first of all, I think it's helpful, and again, you've referenced academic work. We look a lot at the work of Robert Merton, who won a Nobel Prize also, and look at his work on lifetime income, because again, he's very good at really identifying what is the problem, because the problem isn't a capital problem, the problem is an income problem. Okay, so if you define it properly, you can then say, well, if what we're trying to deliver is an income stream over a period of time, and you could make some assumptions over lifespan, of course, because the amount of time you need it for is the big unknown, unless you have better information, that you then need to say, right, well, how are we going to manage this? And you can, of course, manage it in a number of different ways. The simple way to think about it is you buy an annuity. And of course, they've come more recently back onto the agenda for obvious reasons around interest rates. But that is a way of solving for that problem and reducing the amount of uncertainty. You could then step it up a bit and saying, well, we like having some certainty, but we don't want to commit all of that resource to do that. So again, there's quite interesting things that happen around, the hybridization of annuities, or something that used to be very much in vogue back in the days when I was still advising, which was the phased annuity purchase. Again, that was something that was used a lot, and it sort of detunes the point in time risk of the annuity purchase to a degree, because that was a pretty scary moment for a lot of people. And then you move down the pathway to, for people who are comfortable having way more uncertainty, and then therefore much more exposure to leaving their money invested in, whether it's equities or whatever, that they can afford that level of uncertainty, because they know that they've got some confidence that the income stream that they need to maintain their lifestyle is going to be fine. And that might be funded from all sorts of things, whether it's at the base level, the state pension contributing to it, or they might have some occupational pension still that contributes, or they might have some property investments. Again, I think it's so important to bring it back to its financial planning. It's not like the old days where it was just convert this fund into annuity and job done. Now we want to be able to deal with all of the complexity of that. And I think the beauty of the work, the planner, is to say, yeah, we're going to take all of that complexity and deliver it to you, so that in such a way that it's straightforward and simple enough for you to make informed decisions about how we're going to do this in the future. I think the challenge for a lot of people is that they make uninformed decisions, often overwhelmed by the emotions of the situation, and often do things because an idea might be presented to them that simplifies their life, but actually they don't understand it, and they make the wrong decision. So it's super challenging. I absolutely get that. Anybody standing on the brink of that decision, and if they've got enough, if they have enough, fantastic. I think the tragedy for a lot of people is that they're starting to get towards retirement and realizing that whilst they might have enjoyed a nice lifestyle, they've not really provided for retirement, and they don't have enough time left to compensate.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and kind of, I think that problem is definitely, but I think a lot of people will go, oh, if you've got enough money, you haven't got any problems. But people do have problems up that. And if you haven't got enough money, then there's a whole different set of problems down there. Like, and you said it's so truly unique that financial planning around the individual and the family is so important to understand what's most important to you, even for people that have got enough. It's kind of what's most important. How are you going to spend your time and money? And then you create structures around that to get them, as you said, with the most certainty that you can give them, although who knows what happens tomorrow, but as much as you can give them. But ongoing guidance and planning is so important during this process. I want to touch on a couple of bits with you. Let's kind of go into the work that I do, and a lot of stuff that I write about and talk about, and a lot of what I do with clients is people that have got that have been fortunate, but I say fortunate, they've worked very hard to get where they've got to. They've worked very hard, diligently saved, got this money. They've had the accumulation mindset. They're now going into a deaccumulation mindset. But the challenges, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, the challenges around spending your money, seeing your, and you said this, the amount of people that I start to work with, that one of the first things they say to me is something along the lines of, oh, I want to protect the nest egg and I don't want to draw down the capital. And I kind of, that gets my emotions going as well, right? And I kind of recommend them a great book called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins, which is a wonderful, challenging read sometimes. But they have this mindset that it's kind of, you almost have this fixed thing. I'll live off a bit of interest or a bit of return, and I want to make sure that my £1 million is £1 million in 20 years' time. And I get it, right? I get exactly kind of the emotions around this. But how do we start to overcome that? Because, as you said, when we structure the investments, when we structure the plan, when we understand what we're doing, how can we start to think about truly spending our money on what's important to us? And that doesn't always mean it has to be spent on ourselves. We can give that away, which I consider spending your money. And I know you've done some things around how the game of Monopoly can help us understand intergenerational wealth better. Talk to me about this, David, because I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, there's a couple of things. I'll come back to the Monopoly piece in a little while. But I'll illustrate this again, bring my father back into the conversation, because I remember he came from a generation. So he was, came through the Great Depression. And what do we know about those people is that there was a lot of the bad things that happened. There was a lot of shame in the stories that circulated in the family about things that had happened during that period of time, when there was a lot of poverty and fear around, losing, because, could be destitute, and there wasn't the social safety net. So yes, you were in trouble. And this secrecy around money. And
Absolutely.
One of the things that happened after my mother died, and I helped my father with the probate on my mother's estate, was for the first time he saw a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet at work, as I sort of went through, did the valuations on things and put it together. And it absolutely fascinated him. So from never talking about his money to every month I would go and visit and update his valuations, and it sort of, he enjoyed the conversation. And it was good. And so it was one of the things that we bonded over, Six Nations rugby and doing investment valuations. And I said to him once, "Oh, Dad, you really are a wealthy man." Now, I have to stress at this point, he was of modest means, so he had some money, but this completely blew his mind. He said, like, "How could you possibly say I'm not well?" And it's like, no, because you're only thinking about the quantum, the money,
Yes.
and I'm thinking about time. Because actually, if you at the level that you spend, you will never run out of money. In fact, you're accumulating. You don't even spend your pension. So you're accumulating wealth and you're not spending it down. And so we had this conversation around time and money. And a lot of people don't have time and money conversations. They have money conversations. And one of the great things about planning is it reintroduces time and being able to help people understand that they can, manage their capital. They can manage their income, so that whether they wanted to end with zero or they wanted to end with 100,000 to leave as an inheritance, you can kind of see the program working. And of course, the great thing about it being the ongoing plan is it's adjusted. Of course, so let's say you had a great year. Markets delivered way more than you expected. Well, your plan could be a bit more, elevated, and you say, look, you probably, you can afford to buy that new car this year because it's fine. On the flip side of that, you maybe want to say, we're going to need to adjust the expenditure. So what I think is really interesting when you actually have those proper planning conversations is so much of planning is often talked in terms of just one number for what year do you want to retire? So it's one number. How much do you want to spend in retirement? It's one number. And so instead of that, you talk in bandwidths. What would you ideally like to have, but what could you live with? And so once you understand that there's this range that you can operate within, and you properly educate the client about, look, we're going to operate within this range, and therefore we can adjust. And so it's a little bit like if you were watching a sailing boat navigate up the Bristol Channel to dock in Bristol. And of course, the last thing you want to end up is landing on the rocks either side. But provided you stay within the navigable channel, then you're fine. You're gonna oscillate and tack up and down within it, but you're going to be fine. And I think part of when people are using some of these more sophisticated planning tools, whether you use a bootstrapping kind of historical returns kind of simulation or Monte Carlo, and believe me, there are pros and cons to every approach when it comes to planning. Absolutely. But one of the beauties of it is allowing people to understand a little bit of that there are uncertainties around the return, but there's ways that through planning you manage those uncertainties. Yep. And if you feel that you can relax somewhat around that, then it takes the emphasis off this, I must protect the quantum, I must protect the capital, and the fear around seeing any diminution in that. And of course, if you've got the plan set up in such a way of saying, look, we know in advance that the value of your equity portfolio is going to fluctuate. But what we're doing is we're managing your liquidity needs through other instruments. Mm-hmm. And every year we will make sure that those properly discussed. Yep. You're fully aware of the decisions that are made and why they're being made. Yep. And we're in control of your retirement plan. Yep. It's like we're navigating the ship up this channel. And it's going to be side to side, like if you take a plane to New York, it's never following a straight line. It's constantly being adjusted. But of course, you end up at the destination you were aiming for, because that's what you planned.
Isn't the bandwidth on that? I was going to like literally, if you left the plane alone, the bandwidth of where it could go to is like Canada and Florida, isn't it? It's kind of like there's this big, but so it's got a big bandwidth. You don't want to go either there, but the pilot will adjust it accordingly to make sure that you get there. I could not agree more. And I think liquidity is the right thing, isn't it? It's how much of readily available money have you got to live your life now without putting longer term things into, and it's managing that liquidity journey as you go along with people. I also think there's another thing that's quite interesting that I'm thinking about a lot at the moment. It's this, how human beings operate in relative terms, not absolute terms. So we all, we don't look at our situation as it is just in itself. We'll always compare it relative to other situations. So when you say kind of, oh, have I got enough, or am I wealthy, or can I live? You're not doing it with just you. You're kind of comparing yourself with, well, what about my mate down the pub, and what about my father or my mother, and so kind of, I think, getting back to absolute living, and kind of dealing with financial plans in absolute terms rather than thinking about what they look like relative. I think it is quite a interesting mindset to think about. Let's touch on your brilliant article that I'm going to link in about monopoly, and then I've got one more thing, or a couple of things I want to ask you before we wrap up. But how can monopoly help us better understand kind of intergenerational wealth and the benefits of gifting during our lifetime, and, as you rightly said, being open with family about money, as you've very, very nicely said about your relationship with your father when you were talking to him about it?
Well, I wanted to write the article. So to give the context, I wrote an article called Monopoly Money. And it was really, I'd wanted to do it for years, because I'd sort of noticed, based on this sort of, the family background of, people just really didn't talk about money. And I think that's true of many families. You do not talk openly about money. But it's so important. So a couple of things happen. One is that I have a financial advisor, and my wife would come to the meeting. And actually, we realized that in order to be effective, it wasn't really a meeting for me. It was really more a meeting for my wife. And then we thought, well, actually, this doesn't make sense, because we should actually involve our adult children in these conversations. We should actually be completely open with them about where the family is at financially, because at some point they may well be dealing with whatever is available. I mean, and so we wanted them to be educated around money and to be fully engaged in that process. And so then I really got to reflect on how rare is it to actually sit down and have proper open conversations around money. And I thought, well, probably for a lot of people, the only time it happens is you get the Monopoly board out at Christmas and you divvy out a lot of play money, and then you kind of get to see what people are like around money. And we did play Monopoly at this Christmas, although we played the Lord of the Rings version, which was kind of interesting. Right. But then you kind of see how people's attitude, how speculative people are, how cautious they are, and I thought, well, this is just such a great sort of example of how difficult it is to actually take it from the gaming environment and say, well, why wouldn't we sit round as a family and have a conversation? Well, maybe because there's just come so much loaded with emotional judgment, etc. And there ought to be a way that you can do that without all of these other things, or recruitment, or you spend too much, or you do this, or and I've seen what happens when I was advising, and sometimes you get a couple come in and they would be like, they'd be having their argument in front of you about their different attitudes to money. And I thought, well, why, when you're properly trained to be able to work with families and couples, and you're able to facilitate those conversations in an atmosphere of no judgment, then I think a lot of good can be done, because you start to educate families that this is really we are stewards of intergenerational wealth. If I go back 2 generations in my family, we are peasant farmers. Okay, we went through a sort of, my parents worked very hard, became professional people. We had the advantage of them being able to afford to privately educate us, so we kind of stepped on, and I've been very fortunate in my career, and so I do feel that we are where we are because we've inherited some, and we are what we are because we've worked hard for some. And when I look to the next generation, I want my daughters to feel the same, not just the understanding of money, but also the values of how does this come to be. And I think that's the importance of taking it from the example of the Monopoly game conversation into actually it's so important to have family conversations around money and wealth and the future and what they are stewards of. Anyway, I've written the article now, and
I think
I feel that it's out there in the world.
It's great, and it's conversations like you mentioned that you tend to have, and you get through the couples conversation, so they start opening up about money, and they start realizing each other's beliefs, positive and negative, and backstory around that, and that transforms that. And what I do see is when that starts to get transformed, then they bring it up that they want to start involving their children. I think it's quite difficult if you've never had a conversation before as a family to just all of a sudden have the conversation. But I think if you take it bit by bit, get husband and wife or partners get together and think about what that looks like, and then start to communicate with your children. More and more people I work with, and I encourage it. I encourage everyone. We operate kind of like a family board meeting if people want to do that in terms of talking about money and what it means and what people are trying to achieve. So absolutely encourage that to happen, because the more open you are, the more where as you said with your wife, the more that if something does happen, your family members know that there's trusted people to turn to be able to help and do things. It just removes so much kind of backdoor anxiety that people will have. So I think it's hugely important. I want to, as we start to wrap up, I've got two more questions. It's been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you. I'm a big fan of kind of Japanese living and ways of life, and I know that you've written about, or I've seen it somewhere about a particular Japanese concept that was quite fundamental or transformational for you. I talk about Ikigai a lot, kind of which I've got an exercise to take people through, which is actually, you mentioned purpose, David, right at the start of the conversation. One of my favorite ways to try and delve or get purpose from people, true purpose, is to go through the Ikigai exercise. I think it's one of the best ones that I've seen to get people to think. But there's also Kanreki, which I know is what you've done. Just give me a whistle-stop tour of Kanreki and Ikigai, and how you think retirees can learn from them and what it means.
Yes. So essentially what it is this idea that you've completed a full life cycle or a full zodiac cycle. So on your 60th birthday in Japan, you are reborn. So it's this moment of rebirth. So you get to start a whole new cycle is restarted. And traditionally, it would be the point at which the head of the household would hand over the reins of the business to the eldest son. So it's now, you are now head of the...
Yeah.
I now step back in this other role, or the wife would hand over the ceremonial rice paddle to the daughter-in-law, and it's now this: you have the main family responsibilities of the business and the household, and we take on this other life. And to me, it sort of denoted that you had this kind of freedom. You're kind of freed of these day-to-day responsibilities, but of course, as we know, in Japan, the older people are revered and they're respected, and their contribution to the culture, to the family life, etc., is not in any way diminished, and they are very much relied upon in terms of how the family works. And to me, it seemed that as I came up on my own Kanreki, that it described to me perfectly for how I thought this would be just this wonderful unburdening of saying, yeah, you've got, how many decades ahead of you, and you could do some amazing things. And a lot of people who I've been very, find so motivational and have inspired me a lot are people who've never recognized that there was such a thing as an age limitation, and went forward to achieve great things into their 70s, 80s, 90s, and just didn't accept the the fact that the age had anything to do with it. And I've got so many people that I would turn to and point to as saying, well, wow, that to me is the way to be. And when I think about that term, Kanreki and a Japanese example, some people might be familiar with the artist Hokusai. He's probably best known for the woodblock, the painting of the Great Wave, the tsunami wave with Mount Fuji in the background. It's very, very well known. Well, he as an artist, he went through several stages in different ways that he explored his art, and very much, when he came up at 60, he shifted. He had a major shift in his life, and he was kind of hoping to get to the next major shift. And he said something like, "Oh, if only God would grant me another few years, I think I might get quite good at this." I think he was in his 90s at the time, something like that. It's like he never wanted to stop developing and learning and doing amazing things. And I think when we apply that to our mindset on retirement, it's like, oh, wow, you just get this amazing opportunity to achieve so much more because you've kind of earned the financial security to be able to explore these things. And so my list of things I want to get done is like, oh, I hope I get another 34 years because I might just be able to get to the stuff I want to get done over that period of time.
Yeah. What a wonderful mindset. I hope I have another X, whatever that looks like, because I feel like I'm only just mastering this thing. I'm only just getting to it, or I've got this to do. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic, absolutely brilliant. So, one last question, then we'll wrap this up. Bringing you back to the day job.
Mm-hmm.
If, and I kind of asked it earlier on and we never answered it, but I'd love just to finish on this. If the evidence around investing our money and the evidence and research is so overwhelming in support of the way that Dimensional invest, why does it still feel like a secret? Why does the lure of crystal ball gazing and short-term wealth kind of generation, why does that feel like it's still there when it doesn't feel like, Dimensional is fully recognized and the evidence actually is fully recognized?
Well, I mean, obviously there are people with different ideas, and will always look to different types of evidence to confirm their pre-existing biases. So there's everybody will show you evidence to support some view. To your question, it kind of beats me because this stuff has been public domain for decades at this point, and there are lots of academics who've they've taken the work, they've tried to pull it apart, and I think there's a reason why some of this stuff persists.
Yeah.
It has a sound theoretical basis, the empirical data that supports it, the conclusions that are drawn. We're pretty sure that actually that's based on what we know. That's as good as we've got. You could tweak around the edges of it, but we're pretty good sure we've got a good handle on the way that capital markets function, the way that you can identify securities with higher expected return in a systematic way. Okay, you can iterate it in different ways, but that's pretty well done. So then you have to look to incentive structures. Why are people incentivized to tell other stories, and so go to the incentive structure, and that tells you a lot. And I think the fund management industry has done an awfully good job of making a lot of money out of people and selling stories around how people have expertise in identifying the best investments. But when you actually look at it, and again, the academic evidence is very strong, that in most cases, managers don't produce returns over and above what you'd expect by luck. So in any large population, you're going to see people who are being successful, but can you determine whether that's really they've got some superior skill?
Mhm.
Or did they just get lucky? And I do the exercise, if I've got a room full of people at one of our conferences and we do a coin flipping exercise, and you will get somebody who will get 10 heads in a row or 10, right in a row.
Mm.
How did they do that? Well, it wasn't skill. It was they got lucky. But the thing is that what happens when you observe that in something like fund management is you can build an awfully good story around a sequence of good luck, which works really, really well until it doesn't. And I think for people, they need to understand that there's a difference between investing. Why is it that you should expect a return as opposed to speculating? And if I say that a lot to people, I occasionally still get to go to a dinner party or things like that. People will ask questions, and one of the things that people held forth a lot about over recent times was crypto, and I have no, I it's not something I do. That's my choice, and I'm a very, very simple soul. I look to what are the assets and what is the reason I'm going to get paid. If I know that there's a reason I get paid a return on cash, and how that happens, I know from property, I know that there's a reason that I could get paid a rent on that, or if I buy a bond, or if I buy an equity, I know there's a reason why I should be paid and should expect a return. I also know that there's varying degrees of uncertainty around that return happening, but that is also in the price and the expected return.
Yep.
But if you come to me with something weird and wonderful and say, okay, here's this great idea, and I go, well, am I going to get my money back? When will I get my money back? What are you going to pay me for the use of my money, and how are you going to do that exactly? And a lot of the time, they'll just have to admit that, hey, we're just going to rely on some greater fool to buy it off us. Because it's a speculation. So I think a lot of what advisors and planners do is if you really have an investment philosophy. And what I mean by an investment philosophy is that you've got some basis which guides your decision process. And if that philosophy is underpinned by the best evidence that you can find, and that's likely to be obtained from, for example, the academic community, who are there are a range of outcomes, but let's say that they are motivated by a search for the truth. And they will say, we just want to try and get to the truth of this, and the evidence that we've gathered and analysed helps us understand, is this the best version of the truth we have based on what we have at the moment? And you build your philosophy on that, and that guides your decisions and your selections, etc. And you accept that maybe it's never going to be perfect, but it's as good as we can do based on the knowledge and wisdom and experience that we have at this point in time. And that is the service that we want to give to our clients. The best I could possibly do. In the future, we may learn more. And at that point, you'll want me to use that information as well.
And I think that is the service that the public should search out for if they want to work with a financial planner. That's what they should be looking for. They should be wanting to work with a financial planner that has a clear, defined, evidence-based investment philosophy and framework that guides their future decisions for the benefit of the client's hard-earned capital. And that's what they should be definitely searching for. David, this has been a brilliant conversation. We could go on again. I'm sure we'll do it again at some point. I've missed about 4 questions that I wanted to ask you, and we've overrun a bit, but it's been amazing. And I just wanted to thank you for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge, and everything that you've shared with us. It's been so valuable, and I know the listeners will get so much out of it. So a massive thank you from me for taking your time.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's been an absolute pleasure to spend the time talking to you.
Thanks, David. And that just leaves me to thank everyone once again for joining us today on the Humans versus Retirement podcast. Until next time, take care.